The United Nations Secretary General believes that the unity of certain members of the Security Council is key to resolving the North Korean nuclear crisis, which he believes is the most dangerous issue facing the world today.
Speaking exclusively to SABC News in New York ahead of this year's high-level UN General Assembly, he expressed a view that unity between China, the US, Russia was essential if North Korea's nuclear ambitions were to be brought to heel. In a broad-ranging discussion that covered many topics, he praised the Supreme Court decision in Kenya to order a rerun of the presidential poll, defended the UN's consensus-seeking approach to the world's problems, and shared his personal perspective on the political divisions that are testing South Africa's political and economic landscape.
He's gearing up for his first General Assembly as head of the United Nations. But most pressing on his mind is diffusing the tensions on the Korean Peninsula and finding a diplomatic solution.
How do we realistically thread this needle when so many attempts and so many resolutions have only brought us closer to nuclear conflict?
It's my deep belief that if there is a total agreement in the Security Council about the need to stop the process and to make sure that we reach the denuclearization of North Korea, if it is possible to have at the same time the key countries that are involved, of course South Korea and Japan, but essentially the United States, China and Russia, if they decide that indeed it's not acceptable to have North Korea with nuclear weapons, and if they act together, I believe that together they have the instruments of pressure that are necessary to make sure that North Korea gives up.
You mentioned the word unity.
I pressed him on the failures of the UN, particularly in the Security Council, where consensus, often a bedrock of UN processes, has increasingly been hard to come by, allowing the world's most serious conflicts to unravel even further.
Well, we have institutions. Those institutions work based on rules. And we have a Security Council that is still based on the rules that were created after the Second World War. We have, as you know, 15 members, of which 5 are permanent. Those 5 have a veto right. Now, we see the international community divided. We see the Security Council divided. We see how difficult it has been to achieve results in many vital areas. And this has paralyzed the UN in many aspects.
On Kenya's High Court decision overturning the disputed election result.
I'm not judging the decision. I'm saying, I mean, it's good to have a country in which the government wins the election, but there is a judicial authority that is sufficiently independent to decide that the elections need to be repeated, independently of the merits of the decision.
Right.
And this proves that democracy in Africa is something that can exist and in my opinion, is the best way for African countries to move in the direction not only of peace and security, but also of prosperity for African peoples.
I also asked him what advice he had for a young democracy like South Africa, where the future direction of the country had become a political hot potato.
I lived in my country in a dictatorship. Then we had the revolution of the carnation that allowed Portugal to be a democracy and allowed for the Portuguese colonies, for the liberation movements to manage to have their projects become a reality and for our former colonies to be fully independent. And I have to say that our democracy had difficult moments. We went through difficult moments. We have, for instance, in the recent years, economic problems, economic difficulties. But I can tell you, I mean, nobody in Portugal today can imagine to live in a different society, but in a democratic one.
Heads of state and government, including President Jacob Zuma and President Donald Trump, will begin addressing the UN General Assembly on September 19th. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.